Welcome to The Good Life. Thank you for stopping by. I'm Patrick Harney. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for checking this out. Thank you for listening. Make sure to check this out on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, iHEART Radio. If you're listening to this, you can watch us on YouTube as well. Okay, enough with all that stuff. If you haven't noticed since the last episode, and now with this episode, I've added a new one. We've got some affiliate links now. Moving up in the world here. We have some affiliate links that you can get some awesome deals with Buzzsprout if you're trying to start a podcast. With Instacart, if you're sick of going to the grocery store yourself, have somebody else do it for you. Yes, make sure to click the link down in the description, and you can get your discounts and your special deals through them because of this podcast. Anyway, enough with all that stuff, right? Enough with the housekeeping stuff. I have someone on here today who is a legendary visual effects art director. He's worked on films like Saving Private Ryan, Minority Report, The Mummy, Day After Tomorrow, Green Lantern, and he's awesome to talk with. I mean, he's just such a nice human being, and I'm very excited to get into this conversation with him and to let you all listen to the genius of this man. His name is Alex Laurant, and that's all I'm going to say. Enjoy. All right, Alex, we are live. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate you being here. And for those of the audience that doesn't know who you are, please tell them who you are in terms of what you do and all of the amazing things that you've been able to do so far with your career. I know you are a visual effects art director, and you worked with ILM for a long time.
I did. Thanks so much first for having me on as a guest, Patrick. I'm really happy to be here. I enjoy your show a lot, and I love your approach and your whole mission and just casual conversation style about creativity in the big picture. And that I'm really happy to be here. So to what you said about my career, yeah, that's pretty much sums up one of my job descriptions. I was a visual effects art director when I was in the film world. I've danced around quite a bit through my career. I've been really, really fortunate to have a lot of different varied but related types of experiences. So the umbrella term that I use for what I do is art director. In film, it was visual effects. I'm now working in video games and have done some of that in the past. So art director is a good, and concept designer, visual designer. That's kind of the unifying thread that goes through all of these, no matter what the medium happened to have been.
So you've worked on films.
It's all about the visuals. All about the visuals.
Yeah. Well, and what's crazy is, so just to give everybody some context, I learned who you were when I was watching the Corridor Digital YouTube channel, Corridor Crew. I love their stuff. I always watch the visual effects artists react and the stuntmen react and all those videos. And your son works for them, or works with them, correct?
Yes, he does. Yeah.
And so I had seen you on multiple episodes of theirs talking about all these different films and reacting to different VFX shots in different movies in history and stuff, and talking about that. And I love how in depth you go, and how detailed you are, and how big into research you go into. And so to give everybody an idea, some of the films that you've worked on, in my opinion, arguably the greatest war film of all time, Saving Private Ryan. Like honestly, you could just kind of stop there. But so Saving Private Ryan, The Mummy, Minority Report. You've also worked on The Day After Tomorrow, Peter Pan, Green Lantern. I mean, like, you have a massive that's a huge resume right there. Just those films. I mean, you could just say, "Yep, this is what I've done," and that's it. And that's crazy to me. But it's awesome. So I was so excited when you agreed to come on and talk about, your work and your process, and how you go about all of this stuff. And so if we could, I'd like to start with Saving Private Ryan. Sure. Now, when we spoke a little bit, you had said that it wasn't a huge showing for you, and you were with ILM at that point, correct?
That's right. That's right. And
However,
yeah,
it was such a like you have a concept art that you had shown um, that they basically used your exact shot. So please, if you could talk about what that process was like.
absolutely happy to. And I'm going to step back a little and set a little bit of context
Hmm.
for sort of what that whole process is like, so that those in your audience who might not be as deep like geeks about visual effects design, or for that matter pre-production or post-production sort of design process and what all that looks like, is probably worth just a little bit of context for
Of
that,
course, yeah.
so help understand and sort of how it all fits together, and how these films are all similar and very, very different. Similar in some respects in terms of the rituals we go through and the steps, but so different in terms of all of the other variables. First of all, Industrial Light and Magic, that's where the bulk of my film experience was, and still one of the most treasured and fondly remembered chapters of my career. And, you know, it's easy to dress things up like that with rose colored nostalgia and forget all the hard parts. It was a lot of really hard work. There was a lot of all the stuff that you usually get in any creative kind of industry. There's politics, there's egos, there's
Mm,
deadlines and budget constraints, all the stuff. That's no different. It's not like this fantasy Valhalla where none of those things happen. But there's also balancing that. There's a magic, for lack of a better word. It's right there in their name. And maybe the magic is from this deep passion that everybody who works there has. And it's not unique to ILM, but at that time, we can talk about later how things have changed. I'd like to come back to that as a larger topic, just
yeah.
how the industry's changed and what special means, the special in special effects, special visual effects. That's a larger topic. But when I was there, and I would imagine still for the people who work there now, many of which I used to work with, there's some long-term folks that are still there, and I would say that I'd hope that they still feel that. But I can speak for myself and say that at that time, which was late '90s and sort of into the mid aughts, 2000 up to I left in 2004. I was there for 8 years. There was something really special about the place, and so all that hard work and all those stresses that just come with the job were balanced by this incredible passion and feeling of good fortune, and that we could even be there doing the stuff we do. But we're also just deep geeks about film and the craft as well. So that's a little bit of an intro. Just logistically, our art department at ILM. So ILM's work, it's a big visual effects company. We're working on multiple films at once, and we're in Northern California. That's because George Lucas, when he first opened Industrial Light and Magic North, he did so because he wanted to establish a presence outside of the Hollywood mainstream and the LA culture. He wanted to, for a whole host of reasons, he wanted to separate himself. Partially because of, I think, a desire for independence from all of those influences, and to have his own creative space and develop his own creative culture, which he certainly was successful in doing. So that's what that meant, though, logistically, is that we're not in LA, physically close to the seat of the core of the production offices at the film, quite often the sound stages. We're away from that. And we built a whole pipeline and mechanism for making that distance as invisible as we could. But we are so therefore working on a number of different films, as I was saying, at once. And we're also, at the time, we were working on TV commercials. So we also did visual
Mm,
effects for TV commercials, and actually had an in-house commercial agency, pretty much effectively. ILM Commercial Productions was a whole service offering, a whole service agency at the time, where we provided the directors, the production, the creative, and the effects, and all the practical production as well, as I say. So that it was an interesting time to join. That ILM CP commercial part is no longer there. It's not, they're not doing that anymore. But at the time, it offered this great variety, yet more variety, to this ever rotating, ever changing kind of menu of creative opportunities that we had. So Saving Private Ryan was not the first, but close to the first film that I worked on. I had worked on some bits and pieces of some other very exciting things. And when I first got there, I was really starry-eyed. And so I had to contain my my sort of fanboy glee, basically, and show up like a professional for whom this was just work. And I know I've heard you talk about it in some of your other conversations.
Yeah.
We all, meaning those of us who have the opportunity to sort of mix with the subjects or the places or the people that are famous, that we have admired, fame aside, even put the fame aside, just that mean a lot to us, where we're meeting someone or going to this place, that a physical place, a studio where this stuff happens, that we've just spent our lives just, admiring. And here we are. And we're not just as a visitor or a tourist looking for an autograph or a moment to take a selfie with. We're there to work with or in this place or with these people as professionals. And so we learn quickly, right? We need to check all that stuff. I've gone on a long tangent from your question.
No, it's okay.
Set the stage a little. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So ILM is a company that's working on a number of different films, and the way we were structured is our art department was a centralized kind of department that served like a service, if you will, to all the rest of the company. No matter which feature films we're in, no matter which commercials we're in, and a lot of the time we worked on bids for things before they were greenlit that would never see the light of day or might not get greenlit for years to come. That's happened a bunch of times. We just work on a lot of different things. The art department was instrumental for the company to have the early conversations with studios and directors who were trying to wrap their collective heads and their budgets and their planning and logistics minds around what it would be to make film X, to take this script that so-and-so, the director X has really wanted to make, and now they're actually considering doing it. They're shopping around for visual effects studios, and they're also having a lot of conversations about how it will be done, how to actually do it. And they're weighing that practically and creatively. And so sometimes those conversations blossom into the award that we get. We get the job, and we go forward and we do the effects for the film. And other times, as I say, it gets put on hold, might go to another competing effects company, and we say bye-bye and wish them luck, or it just gets put on ice indefinitely. And so we get very used to that cycle, and we, as a result, don't get overly precious about the work we do and try not to get our hopes up. It's really hard.
So at a given time, how many? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry, but at a given time,
please.
How many films could you be working on at once?
Well, the art department and ILM overall could be working on, well, at our peak size when I was there, I think we could be working on typically half a dozen, sometimes more. Not half a dozen big movies, but depending on what period between 96 and 2004, again, my time there. Now ILM has grown with the industry to many multiple campuses around the world, and the capacity and number of concurrent projects and films they can take on has, of course, exploded in proportion to that as they've staffed up. But so half a dozen, let's just say on an average, there's half a dozen. Some of them are big, some of them are really small, just a few effect shots, relatively speaking. A few could mean 2 or 3, could mean a dozen, or it could mean later, like hundreds. And then when Star Wars Episode 1 comes into play, that's probably the largest effects film in terms of shot number and just sheer amount of digital content that ILM had taken on at the time. For the first of the prequels, the Star Wars prequels, there were so many effects shots and so many effects in just about every single shot. It was effectively a digital feature with live actors basically in the mix, but there was every single shot had something digital and artistically added to it. Or modified, with a few exceptions, of course. I'm speaking broadly. Anyway, I jumped way ahead.
That's
Again,
okay.
Context
That's okay.
setting. So a film like Saving Private Ryan. So go ahead, please.
Well, no, I was just going to ask to speak kind of with the Star Wars thing. What do you think about the technology that they're using now, like for The Mandalorian? where they have the massive screens, the LED screens, to be able to put
Oh
the
yeah,
whole. I mean, like what do you think about that whole process and thoughts on that?
I love it. I'm crazy about it. I think it's an amazing coming together of technologies, specifically real time rendering.
Hmm.
That's been the mainstay of video games. That is what video games, how video games happen, is real time rendering and linear filmmaking. These two production processes have found a marriage finally that makes absolute sense and is truly bringing this. It's forming a revolutionary new way to create immersive environments and make movies when it comes to production design and sets and scenery and immersing the cast and the characters into a place where they feel they can be immersed and impacted by the environment around them. Now we're seeing that actually able to happen. I mean, compare that with actors having to work in a complete green screen surround or against a green backing or blue screen backing or whatever. Classically having to react. When I say classically, I mean this is just the way it has been for so many decades of visual effects, and how the actors on set need to react to things that aren't there. The different physical ways that film crews have managed to get around that as best as possible. You know, the classic long pole with a big, you know, ping pong ball on the end or a basketball or whatever, so that the actor knows where to look, sight lines, etc. Or having an actor in a green suit, usually sometimes with mocap, in a mocap suit that's also green to be keyed out. Anyway, there to give the actors in the cast someone or something to react to. All of those things. It's not that they're all going away, but completely. But this is the advent of the technology you're talking about is just making that issue so much better in general. It's fantastic. It's been a long time coming. I'm really excited.
Well, and I know that there's a so for anybody that doesn't know of the technology that we're speaking about, and this is going to be incredibly like dumbed down and using terms that probably are not correct because I don't know this is not the realm that I'm usually involved with, but ultimately what the Mandalorian does, which is on Disney Plus, and it's a part of a Star Wars story. What they use is they have these massive, it's almost like 180-degree screens, these big like LED or ultra HD whatever screens that the would it be the visual effects department they create the background in live time or in real time?
Yes, and I'm going to probably be talking out of school too because I have not worked on one of these sets. I've not worked with this tech, but
Hmm.
as a fan and appreciator of the way it was done before, I know a little.
Yeah.
So I know enough to say something and probably misspeak. So those of you out there who actually do know these particulars, forgive me
Yeah.
or not, but I'm going to probably get some of the details wrong. But yeah, you're basically right. It's actually more than 180 degrees. It's pretty much 360. They call it the version that the Mandalorian uses. They're not the only ones to develop similar technology, but they're the ones who, as far as I know, are this is Disney working in partnership with Epic. Epic makes the Unreal game engine. And again, they're not the only game engine in town, but I have to admire very much the where they are in their maturity of this tech, that they brought it to this level when they did. It doesn't mean there won't be others that follow, but man, the Unreal Engine and the way they've worked this in is really impressive. They call it the volume is what they call the actual stage space
Mm.
with this incredibly immersive screen so that wraps around completely. And then there's also a ceiling part as well. And I believe they call the whole tool system stagecraft, I believe is the word the name they've given to their whole kind of pipeline. It's evolving between Mandalorian season 1 and 2 and whatever's coming next. It's all evolving. So V1 was fantastic and effective. V2, I know, made a lot of improvements, and who knows the future. It is not a static approach or a static technology. We're just seeing the early versions of it. So we have reason to be excited as to what's coming next. But going on with what your basic description was, basically you were asking if the visual effects artists are responsible for creating the environments. And in a way, yes. I think who is creating those environments has changed a bit as well. They're the equivalent of the visual effects artists who created digital environments before, with a mixture of 2D and 3D artwork and models to create dimensionality to things. And we could go into a whole history of visual effects and what that means, what matte paintings used to be, what digital matte paintings are now, how they've gone from flat 2D to actually multi-plane and fully 3D environments that you really can't call a matte painting anymore. But this is all basically how you create a pretend environment and make it look real and blend it with your live action sets and actors. It's how you expand the universe of the story, the world of the story, the locations, because either they don't exist in reality or because they don't exist anymore. They used to, but they don't anymore. Historical recreations. Or because they might exist, but they're simply impractical or impossible to get to, or too expensive to physically get to.
Yeah.
So for any number of those reasons and more, you frequently have need to create digital environments. It could be as simple as you need a snow-covered New England town, but you are filming in summer and you can't film in the winter. So how do you change the summertime blue sky, clear green landscape to a wintry snowscape for a rom-com? It could be that. It's not just Star Wars or, Avatar or whatever, or Saving Private Ryan. It's sometimes the most invisible kinds of situations where visual effects of this kind are used. So again, going off on all kinds of tangents here.
No, yeah.
Bring us back home.
Yeah. Well, and what's amazing about this technology is that, so as an actor, because I'm an actor as well, and I've worked with green screen before, it gets tough after a while. Because, when you're dressed up in these costumes or whatever, you feel it, you look in the mirror after you get done in wardrobe and you're like, oh man, I feel the character. And then you walk out and everything's green. And it's like, oh, this is the world, and so what the Mandalorian does is the actors can see the world around them that they're playing in.
That's right. That's
what's amazing. And to me, I feel like that you can get so much more out of the performances because it's real. It's the most real you can get without it actually being physically there. And that's what's amazing of it, to me at least.
I think it's great to hear your perspective as an actor, because you're speaking to, in some ways, the most important part of the value of this. Like you said, it's like you're feeling immersed in the world, and that contributes to the truthfulness and of your performance. Like you can get in character so much more easily. That part of your brain that you would otherwise be using actively to fill in with your imagination what you think is over there, or what you think is over there, what'll come later. You can see it, and that's so important. And there's the technical side as well, which is, for instance, lighting. Just lighting alone, the fact that the lighting can change during a shot.
Yes.
And that lighting is reflected on you physically in the appropriate way. So just visually, that just puts you in the scene as well. There's something organic and physical about this. Even though it's a beautiful mix of digital and physical, there's a physicality. There is real light hitting you.
Which
wasn't the case before. It was all faked. It was all.
And that's the thing is I'm sure that has to help with the post-production process, and that's got to help the visual effects team, because they don't have to think about that little part of every single frame that lighting has to make sure it's already there for them. So then they can focus on the big stuff, or the things that take more time. You can put more detail into that, put more time into that, because you don't have to deal with the small stuff. With nothing small,
right.
but
Yes, indeed, that's true. No, it is ultimately has already proven to be. I think. I mean, I have no idea what the financials are, or the metrics or data on the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian, or what those projections are. But there are a lot of producers and people who are projecting, who are analyzing that, and looking at what the benefits and the savings are so far, if there have been any. But once the R&D costs are sort of absorbed, what the benefits are going to be going forward, there's going to be a lot of production efficiency and speed. I mean, this was devised in part and embraced the courage it took to decide to take a risk on this new technology was done because it was television and the schedule demanded a kind of turnaround. And yet the bar was so high for the quality and production value they wanted and the expansive worlds they wanted in this. They didn't want it to feel like television. They wanted it to feel like the movies. And I think they succeeded, absolutely succeeded. I'm a huge Mandalorian fan all around, but they really did achieve that on a budget which, at least theoretically, is more in keeping, and a schedule which is more in keeping with TV than what you'd normally associate with feature film post-production.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that's, and to be able to, that's huge if a Star Wars story is like basically the first ones to use that sort of technology. Like if it was something if it was a project that was much smaller, didn't have as much of a fan base and didn't have as big of an audience, I don't know if this technology would be propelled to the level that it's at, or in terms of the excitement over it and I don't think it would get as much attention if it wasn't something that was big like Disney.
It's true. Well, it kind of came to be, in part, what it is now, in part thanks to the support and endorsement and just experiment, the early test use by some very influential and bold creative people. And I'll shout out, not the first one to do it and won't be the last, but Jon Favreau is somebody who I credit a lot with sort of diving in as a creative storyteller and just an all-around creative storyteller, and just he's got a lot of guts and a lot of gumption and just fearlessness about the future. He's got the inventor's spirit. I don't know how much of a hands-on inventor he is, but man, he knows from his position how to bring together those that are, and he has a vision of where technology can go, and he's shown that curiosity. Not to make this whole little featurette about Jon Favreau, but it's worth giving him a moment and shouting him out, because his path really going through The Lion King and Jungle Book, projects he's done with Disney, they get a lot of credit as well for providing. You talked about how much it takes, the bigness or the budget and the scale that you need to launch something like this. Well, they provided that, and he provided the creative endorsement and power to get this idea through. And I think he did a lot of that heavy lifting early on again, the Jungle Book, Lion King, which were different approaches. They were fully digital films, but those were utilizing aspects of digital production that certainly led to what the volume is now. And he's, of course, very much involved with The Mandalorian. So creatively and technically, and sort of bringing all those visions together. And it also has to be said, as long as we're shouting people out, shoulders on whom all of these people are standing successively on each other's shoulders. Cameron, you got to look at Cameron and Avatar. Years ago now, I mean, he's the one who hacked together and cobbled together a very sophisticated system for the day. Still holds up. You can only imagine how they've improved it, right? For Avatar. So a wonderful kind of evolution we've seen in this last decade or more of this particular approach.
Most definitely. Okay, so back to Saving Private Ryan, because I also got off on some tangents and some, because fun. Again, I kind of nerd out on this type of stuff. I love it. Good. So there's I guess I should ask, what parts of Saving Private Ryan did you work on personally?
Okay, that's a great way to bring us back home, because it's going to be really wonderfully anticlimactic. Because after all that setting of the stage, I talked about the fact that ILM can work on really big movies with big shot counts and lots of ambitious effects with creatures and locations and ships and all kinds of stuff. And we can also work on much more quote unquote humble or modest films where the visual effects are not out front and center as part of the entertainment thing, a Jurassic Park, a Men in Black, or whatever other films that were going on when I was there. Or any Marvel Universe movie. You just, again, changes in the industry. Saving Private Ryan was a quote unquote small film for a small visual effects job, I should say, for a very big movie, for obviously a very big director, right? So paying tribute to a very big and important event in our history. So the effects and the shot count ILM had, modest as it was, we felt a sense of that importance, all of us. We felt a sense of the honor that we could have, however small a role or contribute a small part to it. We really took all that very seriously, and that added to it. So to answer your question, ILM did, I don't even know what the shot count was, but total, I'm going to say it was in the dozens, in the low dozens.
Wow.
It was not that many shots. And I will say that and a lot of them were really invisible stuff. We worked on a lot of during the opening battle scene, particularly, we worked on a lot of enhancements to the explosions and the injuries and some of the stuff that would have been too dangerous for the cast to get too close to an explosive squib. We'd provide an explosion or a blast impact kind of thing on the sand, a blast hit on the sand closer to a character than would have been safe to do. So we would basically embellish and enhance the danger and all of the mayhem enhancement, you could call it. And that included some really gory stuff that we also did. Some of that really brutal, gory stuff, depicting very, very graphically unique for the time. It was the first time that war had been, certainly that event, let alone battle in general, had been depicted. I mean, there was a whole generation of war films and directors that really went very confrontationally, whether it was Platoon or, The Deer Hunter and many other films in the decades prior, through the 70s and 80s, that had built up this style, if you will, this approach to depicting war in extremely graphic, confrontational ways without gauzing it over or cutting away from it, but forcing the audience to look at it. But even with that stage set, this film and the opening sequence did do something at the time very, very differently. And a lot of that had to do with that immersive handheld camera, sort of news camera. I'm in the middle of it.
Yes.
Shaky cam style that back then, hard to imagine a day when it wasn't the norm, but it wasn't the norm then. It was really kind of a novel thing that thrust you into this. And Janusz Kaminski, Stephen's loyal and constant cinematographer for so many of his films, was, a large part of devising that look and style and executing it. And so our work was, again, to enhance all that. So I would do concept work and help generate some art assets for things that are just like bullet hits or explosions or some gory injuries or something that we would add on top of the already very explicit makeup and physical stuff they had gotten on set. To cut to sort of maybe the chase of the biggest shot that I worked on is just one shot, but it's an iconic shot in the film. It's the beach shot that is after that opening battle.
And when they took the beach, and
after they've taken the beach.
Yep. Exactly. And so they're bringing all the trucks in, they're bringing all of the, they're basically organizing everything now at that point. And they're, and I believe you have the original concept art.
I brought the show and tells.
Yes. This is so incredible to me because, when you show this, now I will put, obviously I'll put up the clip of a kind of a side by side of they pretty much used like completely. They didn't really change much of anything from the original art design that you came up with, which that's got to be really flattering, right?
You know, it's very exciting. It's really gratifying. It's exciting, no lie. Flattering. You know, we'll get to that later. Yeah. I mean, it's wonderful. It's great. It makes.
Yeah.
We talked about the feeling of gratification you get when you're contributing to something.
Yes.
And even if you have a small part in this one little bit, and there are so many quote unquote below the line people that are contributing that don't have a thing to show, a shiny piece of art or whatever. The thing they show is that they built that set. They were the plasterers that built that set, or they were the gaffers that helped just create the framework for the entire set to work safely for the crew. I mean, I'm just shouting out to everybody behind the scenes, basically.
Yeah.
Flattering. Yeah. I mean, this is the business. This is our craft. So we're honored and glad when we're working in it, when we get a job, getting paid to do it, then we're on. And sometimes you get to be out front and be recognized for something specific or creative. And so I'm super grateful for those opportunities like that I get, but I try really hard not to let it go to my head. So but to your question, it's great. I love the fact that this shot made it in, and sometimes it actually does look in the final film like you painted it. It's rare, but it sometimes happens. So love it.
So anyway, if we could, let's see this.
Yes, as you said, Patrick, you'll be putting this stuff up. So this is just the clean plate. This is a shot that we were given. Sort of how this works is, you know, the location crew with our ILM effects crew represented out there by the effect supervisor. Stefan Fangmeyer was the effect supervisor. He's now a director and he's working on Game of Thrones and all sorts of amazing stuff. He's continued to have an amazing career. Shout out to Stefan. And so he was the effect soup on this.
Okay.
And so he would be out there with the practical crew, along with a couple of technical folks to scan and survey the area and take measurements and take a lot of reference photos, and to talk with the director and the director of cinematography, again, Janusz Kaminski, about all the different shots and about their vision for it. So once this location had been established and all of these, I don't remember the term for these things, and there have been historians who've corrected, they're facing the wrong way and blah, blah, blah. There's always going to be some critics.
Of course.
We're used to that. But anyway, this is how the set was dressed, and they had a handful of real tanks and trucks, and maybe one small platoon's worth of costumed soldiers, extras as soldiers, doing marches and drills up and down the beach that we filmed early, not even an early version, just a very typical version of crowd duplication. It had been done before. It's been done a lot since, and there's nothing particularly novel about it, but it was used really well here. We covered this beach. So here's the art. So then from that to
oh my gosh.
Shiny. Sorry, this is a shiny one.
Nope, that's perfectly fine.
There's a not shiny version. It'll reflect less. There you go.
Wow. Look at that.
Down here in the corner, you see the clean plate.
The clean comparison. Plate.
Yeah. So, you know, this is it's a fair question to ask. How do I know what to put in here? You know, this was, you know, largely about research. And, you know, you mentioned that earlier. I've talked about it before. I felt like I'm no war historian, but I had to be one pretty quickly. Not a historian, but I had to gain enough knowledge quickly to be able to accurately and respectfully depict this scene. Now, I should also, it's a good moment to talk about what filmmaking's or arts, to get really big, art's relationship to truth, to factual reality, the balancing act between historical accuracy and entertainment and storytelling. And that shows up everywhere, right? This is just one example. Liberties are taken frequently. It's part of the medium, whether it's theater, whether it's film, whether it's literature, writing, whatever, or visual art. If you're purporting to depict something that is real enough to have a real reference point for people, like a historical event or person, biographical, whatever, you are going to have to walk this line, right? Between respect and accuracy, respect for the real subject and accuracy to it. and your interpretation of that as the artist and or collection of artists. And there's a reasonable people can have a spirited debate about that balance, right? And what's right and what the right balance is, and when it's okay to take a lot of liberties and go way off onto some very personal interpretation of something that's just using the real event or the real person, the source, as its starting point only, but it's not really about the source at that point. It's about the artist's statement, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
This was not one of those situations. This is a situation where we felt absolutely beholden to the historical moment.
Yeah.
And for all kinds of reasons. And luckily, Spielberg was also that way as well. I mean, he's a storyteller who has to tell his story. He has to, within the constraints of the medium, right? He has X amount of time to convey the things he wants to convey. Mm-hmm. And he and his entire team, from, again, the DP down to the editors, down to the screenwriter, everyone has to wrap this, the massiveness of this event, the historical importance of this event, has to wrap it up into the tidiness of the film format, the medium, the linearity, right? Yeah. It's kind of crazy when you think about it that way.
It's incredibly crazy.
How do you do that?
No, it always amazes me to see a really well put together war film that you can tell the research was done. You can tell that there was ample, or there was enough time to really make sure that every detail that they could get correct was correct, and I think that's very important. I mean, I have a lot of family who has been in the military, and my grandfather, he was in World War II. He was in the Navy. He was on the first naval ship to go back at the Japanese after Pearl Harbor, and so to be able to see, or hear that, it was important to everyone involved that all those details were correct, makes me happy, and I appreciate that, because I know those men that fought, they deserve that, so that's great. That really is.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the nuts and bolts of that particular image are, the research I did involved acknowledging that how little I knew, making the most out of whatever was available in terms of books. It had been well documented, but also a scarcity of photographic documentation for that event, considering how important it would become, it was, and would be in our historical story. Some of the most important journalistic photographs and documentation, photographic documentation, was lost. And there's whole stories and books written about that, about the photographers and the tragic loss, in addition to the tragic loss of life, obviously, the historically tragic loss of a lot of that documentation. A few photographs do survive, and so I made use of those. I cold called veteran societies up and down in different parts of the country, and just did a phone tree kind of thing. Can you tell me where I might find information about this or that, about this battle, about this event? I specifically was asking about what the gear was that they were using. These huge ships, and then these blimps in the sky that are suspended X number of yards above the sand. Again, different military historians might correct me, but I learned that I think they were called barrage balloons, and they are there to basically prevent, and they're a commonly used tool to basically prevent low-flying enemy aircraft from doing strafing runs, because the planes would get tangled in these lines, and so they suspend these rows of these small blimps, basically full of helium, above whatever the valuable site is in this case. So it became a compositional element for me. I saw some dots in the sky in one of these old grainy black and white photos, and then followed that up doggedly and got some folks on the other end, a veteran or two who were still alive and willing to talk to me. And they told me about how they worked. And finally, that was able then to direct me to do more research, look that up, and I found a couple of great photos of the actual things. And suddenly I learned this new thing. This is a way to keep small airplanes from buzzing you and attacking you. And I decided that was a kind of a cool enough bit of trivia, but more importantly, it was a really, I thought, just interesting visual component.
Yeah.
It drew you, and it gave us a nice picket fence perspective device to bring us into the scene.
Yeah.
And there was a nice parallax as the camera kind of swept across it. You could see these balloons sort of shift in perspective a little bit. Anyway.
Yeah.
Always thinking about all of these things, right? What makes a good picture compositionally, what dramatically or historically hits and has to be in there, and to get that right. Always balancing.
Have you ever thought about starting a podcast but don't know how to start? Check out Buzzsprout. Hey, that rhymes. Anyways, I did a bunch of research before starting this podcast and found that Buzzsprout was the best option to make sure I was set up for success, and I'm so glad I chose them. They help get your show listed on every major podcast platform, help you make a sick podcast website, show you detailed analytics to see how and where people are listening, and they even have how-to videos to help you get started. The team at Buzzsprout is dedicated to helping you get your podcast off the ground. They've helped over 100,000 podcasters already, so I'd say they know what they're doing. If you follow the link down in the description, it lets Buzzsprout know that I sent you, and if you sign up with them for a low-cost plan to host your podcast, you'll even get a $20 Amazon gift card. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and that's Buzzsprout. Are you sick and tired of going to the grocery store? Well, now you don't have to. Let someone else do it for you with Instacart. Get all your favorite items without having to stop doing whatever it is you're doing. And get all of those items in as fast as 1 hour. What? Get products from your favorite local stores and even see how Instacart highlights deals to help you save money and get the most bang for your buck. Find everything you usually get, plus see some smart suggestions for new items in case you're feeling a little adventurous. And you won't be getting busted eggs or gross brown lettuce either. By hitting the link in the show notes, it lets Instacart know that we sent you, and it helps support this show. Get free delivery on your first order over $35 now with Instacart.
Now, you also worked on Minority Report, the Tom Cruise, Colin Farrell. What was that experience like? Because that's a very different, very, very different, film from Saving Private Ryan. So what was that experience like? What were some of the challenges that you faced while working on that film?
The only really one of some of the main unifying things that unify those two films are Spielberg as director and Janusz Kaminski as cinematographer, and probably the rest of Steven's team, because he likes to keep a lot of his team. His editor might have been the same, I can't remember. But and then ILM working on a lot of the shots, not all, but most of the shots for Minority Report. I loved working on Minority Report. It was one of the favorite experiences working at ILM. As many of us will often feel, sometimes say, we don't write or direct the films. We put our hearts and souls into our part, and the film may or may not end up something that we like or good, whatever that is, or popular, might flop at the box office, or it might unexpectedly or expectedly take off and be a huge hit. You just don't know. And when you're working on your part of it, you really try not to and can't be bothered thinking about that. You are in the moment and you're just focused on your part and making it the best. And I feel pretty sure that you have a version of that too, that you could probably say some similar words about your perspective as an actor.
Very much so.
You can't be right. I mean, you can't be worrying about how it's going to be received. You're in your moment, right? And you focus
show
on
up
delivering what you're there to do.
Exactly. You show up, you do your job the best that you can do it, and then once you're done filming, you have to let it go, because at that point you can't do anything else to it. You can't affect the outcome of the film. All you can affect is the job that you do within that film. And I mean, I've been a part of some projects that I wasn't sure how they were going to go, but I did my best to deliver what I could, based on what the director wanted and needed. And then I see the finished product, and I'm super excited. I'm like, this is sweet. Like, this turned out so much cooler than I thought it was going to. And then the other has happened where I think, oh, this is going to be really sick. This is something special, right? And then it's just nothing. But that happens, and it's all a learning experience, and it's all experience. And I mean, every project you work on, you gain some new nugget of knowledge that you didn't have before, and it's constantly. I mean,
right.
with us, we're constantly students. When you're in a creative business, you're constantly a student. You're constantly learning, growing, until the day you die, or until the day you stop doing it. So yeah, I completely agree.
Right. You hope so. You hope so.
Yes.
That's great. I love the way you put that. And that speaks to a whole, another wonderful tangent. It's all about wonderful tangents of control, the illusion of control, the illusion that our part or our thing really is going to control this greater outcome. There's a lot of metaphorical, you can utilize that in your life philosophy in so many ways, controlling the things that you really can control and focusing on those and trying to worry less about all the rest. I mean, it depends on your role in the big picture. As a director or a producer, when you're that high up, you're responsible for a whole ecosystem, an entirety of the whole thing. So you have that big picture point of view. But when you're a contributing member, you focus again on what you can do. So that's good stuff. And always a student. You're right.
Yes, always.
So back to your question, Minority Report. Why I loved working on that. Okay, that was also another example of from the different types of role that ILM would play in a movie, and the different types of participation or roles that the art department at ILM would play. So some films I worked on, I got to contribute, I and all my fellow artists. There were concept artists in the art department. There were pre-visualization artists who did animatics, rough sort of versions of what the shot would look like before they're done in very simple, either drawings, animated drawings, or simple 3D animation that would be just real rough throwaway kind of ways to test out how a camera could move through a scene, or what the composition of architecture, buildings, or creatures or characters moving and animating in a shot might look like. That's called pre-visualization, otherwise known as animatics. So we had those artists working in the art department, as well as storyboard artists, and animatics are like a moving extension of storyboards for those that might not know what that means. We had those in our art department. We had the visual effects art directors like myself, who are also concept artists. That was part of the requirement, was that an effects art director at ILM also has to have the drawing and art skills to be a concept artist, because you're always going back and forth. And when a film comes in and we get it awarded, that team is assembled for the duration of that film, and the art director from the art department, for example, myself or any of my other art director peers, would get assigned to that film. We would then pull in concept artists and others to help visualize all this stuff, to help us, depending on how much time we actually had to do artwork ourselves. And then there's also the role of the studio. And they might have, and usually would have, contributed a lot of early imagery, a lot of early concept art from their own art department. And those images are really important for us to get, because those are much more have a more direct line to the director's vision and the director of photography's vision, because they were made in the same offices that the director and the DP and the producers and the production core are holed up in together, hashing this thing out. That's where those artists are. And later, when I worked at post-ILM, I worked on the feature Green Lantern. That was my experience with that kind of art department, a pre-production art department. Very different. Similar, but very different.
So that's kind of your launch pad.
Talk about relinquishing control.
Right. That's kind of like your launch pad.
Yeah.
Okay.
We get that packet of artwork. We get the script and a packet of artwork and reference photos and whatever the production art department has done. And the production designer on the movie is the one who is responsible for designing the visual look of the film in partnership with the DP and their entire team of of set dressers and location scouts and everything. They're responsible for the visual look, but the production designer is the one responsible for designing the look of the movie overall, sets, locations, etc., and overseeing the production with the productions art department of the building of the sets on the locations, in the sound stages, whatever that mix is. ILM does our art department is like a kind of a cousin of that, a little post-production, although that's not really any longer exclusively true. We're now pre-production, mid-production, and post-production. Visual effects is now touches all these different phases of the timeline, the life cycle of a film, in a way that wasn't always the case. So our role, my role, is to kind of be an adjunct to the production designer on the production. So yes, back to your question, we get this packet, and the packet's going to include any visuals they put together. Now, sometimes it's just some kind of sort of like this we thought would be cool for this creature or this effect. You guys now, because you have an art department, we're coming to you partially for your contribution to this. And so give us your take, and then we'll choose which parts of which we like. And then we will finally, because we're the ones building the actual creatures, building those final assets for those final shots, we're the ones who have the hands and the control, if you will, the artistic control over the final product. So we, on some films, we have a lot more creative input, like The Mummy. Stephen Sommers, the director on that, really came to us to contribute a huge amount of visual creativity and help him build the whole visual effects aspect of the movie, from ancient Egypt to the mummy stages and the mummy himself and all the other effects that went into it. That's an example of one where there was a huge amount of contribution from our team creatively because the director came to us with that spirit and early on. Now, in the case of Minority Report, Spielberg had gathered not only his production designer, Alex McDowell, but a huge team of futurists, they were referred to. And they did this think tank, which has been pretty well documented. And they met for, I don't know how long, but they had a whole series, like a symposium, a brainstorming symposium of sorts, part research, sharing, all of these specialists from all sorts of different segments of just thinkers, basically, sociologists thinking about the future of culture, architects, city planners, technologists, looking at the future of devices and how humans interact with technology, and transportation sector people, experts from all sorts of diverse areas, all came together with their very studied and well-researched projections of what life would be like, plausibly, 50 or 75 or so years in the future. That's where Spielberg, wanted this film to be set, in the not too distant future, distant enough so we'd see the difference and qualify it as sci-fi and see a version of ourselves that was different enough to be compelling and provoking in the right ways and allow for the key aspects of the story to happen, pre-crime, pre-criminals, all of that, that come from the original Philip K. Dick story. So there had to be enough distance and enough futurism, if you will, putting it out in the unforeseen future that we could believe that something like that would happen. At the same time, he wanted it to be relatable to what we live and breathe now and not be a shiny, chrome-covered future that was unrelatable. That was the sort of mandate he gave to all of us. When we got our packet of artwork, it was the result of an amazing amount of thinking and discussion, and world building is the overused but still very relevant term that's kicked around all the time. World building that this whole team had done. And so I benefited from a very complete, well thought out vision, not just of the world and what this was Washington, D.C., it's where it takes place, X number of decades in the future. Very well defined, but also they had done a lot of pre-visualization and animatics that I mentioned earlier, showing how some sequences would actually flow.
Yeah.
So this was one of those times where, I got to meet Alex McDowell a few times on set and in some of our production meetings in LA, and we clicked and got on well. And it was just such an honor. He's an amazing guy in general, just a phenomenal thinker. And he was also a rock star production designer at the time. He had done Fight Club and I'm forgetting, but Fight Club. Right?
Fight Club, yeah. well, we can't.
You don't need to say anymore.
Can't mention that. You can't mention Fight Club. So we'll have to beep that out or something.
That's right. So to kind of try and cut to the chase, that's kind of this context for how the scope of work and how I and my team, our team at ILM, kind of fit in and built on the vision. So our job was then to take this massive scope of this world they defined, and some pretty ambitious ideas about how these key sequences were going to flow, particularly the maglev roadway, and how that was going to feature into the architecture, and how it was going to feature into this key chase scene of Tom Cruise's character, jumping from car to car on the side of the building, and that iconic scene from the film. Yeah. A lot went into that, just getting that right and walking that line, the balance between futurism and future tech and familiar, everyday, mundane reality, and making it feel tactile, like it's just stuff you'd go outside and see in a city. Stained cement the structures were put up by a contracting company that maybe took some shortcuts. There's some leaks, there's some drips, it's cast concrete and some metal joins, just like real freeway overpasses. These freeway overpasses were made from the same kinds of stuff. I do have images. Oh
yes, and while you're finding those, one of the things that I remember, because you talked a little bit about this when you were on Corridors, one of their episodes, and one of the things that you mentioned was, I think it was Ren had talked about the really, really tall building, like of looking and go, man, that building has to be so massive. But something that you had mentioned was that you made as he's coming down this building, you made these futuristic looking air conditioning machines, because there had to be a horizontal point to show how fast they were going. That just even think of like, dude, but I love that though, because like, you know what? Well, yeah, you see air conditioning units on the outside of buildings, and well, why wouldn't they still have that? It's just a little more futuristic looking, right? Right? That's so cool. I love that.
That's right. We'll throw something up like that. Here, I found it. I found one. There's something. These little guys here.
Yeah.
They're just basically whatever the heck they are. It didn't matter. You also had the simple balcony window thing. But you can see here, this architecture is not super futuristic, elegant, swoopy lined like we see in today's architectural trends. It's pretty mundane stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, kind of looks like blocky apartment, condo, business towers. And that was by design. There are a couple of little features and aspects. And then, of course, you've got these massive maglev freeway structures that are completely fantastic. But, my job was to make sure that they didn't look Dr. Seussy, like rubbery, magical fantasy things that somehow magically defied gravity. But they're big and bulky and kind of ugly and block your view. And, so that was inherited from a lot of the gorgeous art that we got from the production art department, but we are the ones who had to actually finally interpret it. And part of my job and our job was to actually condense down to a pretty tight shot count what Spielberg wanted, the storytelling that needed to happen without going overboard and keeping it super tight. That sequence goes by so fast, and there was so much work that went into it. And that's true for so many moments that visual effects artists work on, or frankly, anyone in film. You know that if you've had any small roles on films, it's like the thing you've worked so hard and focused on. Oh my God, there it is, and it's okay, it's gone now.
Yep, I'm in it for about that long.
Was my scene.
Exactly. That's very correct, and
that's
but
okay.
It is because it's all part of it. It's there still. Now, I did want to ask, because you also worked on The Day After Tomorrow, correct?
Yeah.
So what was that like?
I don't have any artwork in front of me for that, but we can throw some up. Yeah.
That's absolutely okay. Yeah. So what was that like? Because that had to be, I mean, you're literally creating an ice age. I mean, so what was that like?
So, yeah. Well, yet another example of another size and shape of job for ILM. So that was one where the industry had an example of the industry changing over time. It wasn't exactly only with that film, but that's an example of a moment in time in like early 2000s where visual effects films had gotten so huge, and with a director like Roland Emmerich with such massive ambitions for scope and spectacle on screen. That's what he's known for. I mean, he just turns it to 11 or 12 or what. I mean, just like all the way up, and he's going to give you more and more and blow you away. Roller coaster kind of thrills. The quantity and the quality, while maintaining a really high quality bar. So he too is someone who really pushed his production partners and effects partners to go beyond what was acceptable or, done the old fashioned way. And Day After Tomorrow was a great example of that. Like a lot of his other disaster movies that he's made. They're always pushing that envelope. He had gone, the point being that it required more than one effects house. And this was a stage in the industry where having ILM or Digital Domain or Weta or Sony or whoever it was be the sole main single effects house was much less frequent. It used to be much more often that at ILM, we'd be the ones doing pretty much all the effects in a given movie. Still happens. Almost always, though, there's at least a few shots or a sequence that has to get carved off just to meet the schedule. Minority Report was one of those. I mean, it was true then as well. The spider sequence, you remember the little creepy crawly spider devices that the police used to spy on people? We did a little bit of early design work in the art department for that. Got some sketches. This is as far as it ever went. I did a bunch of sketches of what these creepy things would look like attaching themselves to your face. But it was super fun, but that was just a brief little exploration. Again, we're throwing ideas into the hopper early on for that. But that work went to another company, PDI. Henry Labonta was the effects soup on that film, and they did a fantastic job on that sequence. So you're just going to be taking a piece of the larger pie, and that is just more and more true now. Now you've got, for blockbuster films and anything in the Marvel universe, for instance, just typical effects films nowadays are going to use usually 2 to 3 minimum major effects houses, plus a smattering of smaller ones to take care of all of the stuff in between that needs last minute cleanup or needs a new shot done or whatever.
How do you keep consistency with like that? Because I feel like that would be incredibly difficult if you have 4 production houses, or effects houses working on these. How do you keep the consistency of what this shot may look like in terms of the way these characters look, but then this shot, like do those production houses, are they in contact with each other, sending plates over to each other, or different, I don't know what they'd be called, but does that happen much?
When it's working well, absolutely, it has to. You raise a really good point. That is also something that we'd like to think has matured, is that connective tissue, that part of the pipeline that brings the unity that you're talking about. One of the keys is a really solid effect supervisor who's the central unifying effect soup for all of them. Their team, their production team. And they're the ones, so having a strong central core team who is bringing and conducting and coordinating all of the work from all the different vendors, that's the key. That's the key. Then you have the technology side and the sharing of assets, also huge. There used to be, and probably still sometimes is, a huge amount of needless redundancy where assets that one studio made using a certain kind of tool set and saved out in a certain format and use a certain piece of software to do all their stuff because they're very roll their own kind of unique house. They do that. That's how they do it. The other 2 studios don't use those tools at all, and they're not compatible. There's going to be this painstaking conversion process to get these massive digital assets, be they dinos or skyscrapers or spaceships or whatever, from this studio over to that studio. That is a technological hurdle. So now, as the industry's matured and can plan for this, consistency of software tools, of languages, of formats, and establishing a remote effective sharing pipeline for everyone to be able to access the same repositories of shared assets. This is huge. It's huge. Alex McDowell, the production designer I mentioned earlier, he's one of the people who was one of the earliest thinkers that I'm aware of to start promoting. I'm sure there were others before him, but he really worked a lot on this idea of reimagining how production worked in terms of set design, pre-production, production, and post-production being thought of as a whole upfront, redefining the barriers and boundaries between those steps and thinking of it as one continuum and planning for it accordingly. He put a lot of thought and tried to, revolutionize aspects of that. I'd like to think that a lot of his thinking percolated out. Certainly, he wasn't the only one to feel this way. I think it's finally, out of necessity, kind of caught on, because this is no longer a rarity that you have, again, 4 or 5 different companies working on a blockbuster movie. It's just commonplace now.
Yeah. So one of the things
Day After Tomorrow.
No. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I never got back to answering your question.
Yeah, that's okay.
That's
go
the
ahead,
pattern
please.
of this conversation. You ask a question simple about a movie, and 15 minutes later, maybe we'll get to it. Yeah,
we'll circle right back.
So we worked on this. How to make a short story really long. The deal with Day After Tomorrow is we were brought on to work on the ending sequence, as you said, the New York under ice sequence.
Yeah.
We also did some wolves that had run across and threatened our cast during the scene, a couple of other miscellaneous effects, but primarily it was in realizing these shots that involved this massive, the scope of the city of New York under these layers of ice and snow. It was super fun to work on, and we had a good deal of freedom to explore what that look was of the ice and snow. Again, some preliminary work had been done by the studio's art department, and they had another effects company who'd created that very iconic wide shot of Manhattan with the 2 people walking in the snow. It was used in the trailer. So one of the other main effects houses that did a huge amount of the water work, the water effects for that flood tidal wave sequence for that film. I believe it was them. I think they're the ones, could be wrong, who created that shot for the trailer. And that's often the case is you sometimes need to rush some early shots out for the trailers long before not only the rest of the film's effect shots and post-production are anywhere near done, but before they may have even fully been designed. You kind of got to get something cool out soon as a preview. Yeah. Sometimes that locks you in to that because it's been released in some form. And so that's okay. I guess that shot's kind of designed now, but small tweaks can still be made. Okay. You'll see that in some trailers. Some of the shots just, if you were to compare them side by side to their final versions, their final ones are hopefully a lot more refined and sometimes a little bit different. In this case, we were able to inherit the spirit of that shot, and we did our own version of it, kind of redid it in a way. But the aesthetic of how the snowy environment looked was already kind of set. But it was super fun to build on that and then carry that over into the rest of the sequence. I did get to meet with the director, Roland Emmerich, at the offices. He was super collaborative. He was a film nerd, just like you'd expect, and it was a real nice opportunity to just spread these sketches out in front of him and just have a person-to-person conversation. Yeah. We started off talking before about sort of being nervous in the room with someone famous or who's the big boss. And what's just so nice to find is that most of the time, that just isn't the case. These people who you're admiring and thinking are going to be just glowing with their own fame and maybe even full of themselves in some way. Yeah. They're just like people. They're just people. Yeah. And they really, above all, just want to go to work and work with people who are going to treat them like people, just like collaborators. We're all making this thing together. Yeah. What you do, what I do, we're all part of it. And let's just roll up our sleeves and get into it. And let's not focus on the fact that I'm Mr. or Mrs. Big Shot. Yeah. It's really no fun when you get the exception to that, of course. That's the cliche. But it proved, my limited experience has proven that it's more often than not the case that they want to get to the work. George Lucas is like that. Spielberg was like that. The actors I've met, are like that. You've talked about this in some of your other conversations.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's one of those things where
Things like that.
it's at the end of the day, yeah, you can kind of, freak out internally for a moment, but at the same time, they're colleagues. At the end of the day, if you want to really break it down, they're colleagues. And so, and you're both there to do a job, and you're both rooting for each other to do really well for that job.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, that's great. That's really great. Now, I do want to, because I know we touched on this a little bit, but one thing that you had mentioned at the beginning that you wanted to circle back to is how the industry has changed. So in your eyes, what are some things that, whether they be positive things or maybe negative things, that you've seen change throughout your time in this industry, as you have much more experience in this industry, to be able to witness all the different transitions. So what are some things that are, may they be good or bad, that you've seen?
It's a little bit of both, or a lot of both. It's not all one thing. It's just really my own subjective observation. Everyone's going to be different, but I find that, and this is going to sound naturally like a little bit of nostalgic, indulgence, and that's okay. It might be, but be that as it may, I have seen. I started going to effects movies that had effects. I fell in love with effects when I was a kid, when I was a teenager in the 70s. And there was just something, because of the rarity of them, how different they were. I mean, the film industry and media industry landscape, of course, was so completely different. And I won't spend a lot of time listing all the differences. We all know them. But just take yourself back, if you're anywhere. You might not be old enough to take yourself back that far, unless you go sort of in reverse, negative, before you were born.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But I can tell you, and anyone sort of over a certain age can tell you, that in the 70s and 80s, particularly the 70s, let's just say, special effects, as they were called then, were physical, and they were optical. They were not digital. There wasn't any digital, with just those very few exceptions. You'd see an early wireframe computer graphics image as some sort of sci-fi interface show up in Alien or Blade Runner or any other, film that could afford to have one or two screenshots of something that looked like it was computer graphics. Computer graphics were the thing that they were imagining as an artifact of the future. So you've got a Johnny Mnemonic or whatever other, Lawnmower Man. And, these were all the early versions of what computer graphics were thought to look like, using whatever the closest thing they had then to actually depict them. Sometimes they actually used computers and got the best results they could. Other times they faked it. Tron, the first Tron. I mean, that's all sort of a physical, analog, old school technique used to imagine a future of what digital visual worlds would look like.
Well, and Star Wars,
point
right?
being, Star Wars.
The
little screen, the blinking screen. Yeah, there you go. Yep. So how it's changed, in a nutshell, I think just special visual effects were more special back then, through the 80s. 70s, and the 80s was sort of the explosion of effects and the fantastic in film, in big film. It wasn't just the stuff. And remember, effects were often 90% of the time the stuff of pulpy, cheap B movies that would play at grindhouse movie theaters or drive-ins, and they were not considered high entertainment or big cultural events for the most part. And they really grew up as production value grew up, as George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and other names that I really should be adding to this list, and I'm forgetting right now. John Carpenter, just an enormous number of filmmakers, from John Landis, from that era, the golden age of sort of the 70s into the 80s, who started to expand the vision. I mean, you could say Francis Coppola as well. He wasn't about visual effects, but the scope of what movies could be. The birth of the blockbuster, of the tentpole event movie. I often, started off saying that you'd seen me on the corridor thing. And one of the things that touched me, that was the first one of these conversations that I'd had, really kind of looking back with a new generation as the audience, and telling these stories about my time and, starting in the late 90s in film. And it's touching and wonderful, but I was a little unclear on why this was so interesting to people, because I look back and can only imagine this stuff must seem so stale and kind of boring and dated to all of you folks who've grown up on pure digital imagery. And on the contrary, I heard since then and was told by Nico and others on that day that I was there, oh no, those movies have a place in our cultural history and in our hearts if we were of the right age to have those be the first big movies we went to that made a real impression on us. And there's something special about that. And I think that sums up my answer to your question. The sheer volume of media that we have access to now, the sheer volume of digital imagery, the volume of amazing visual effects, the scope, the sophistication of the imagery, just simply the no detail of anything can pretty much, any detail of anything can be rendered now in excruciating detail. And so from the quantity, the impact, the volume, everything's just been bigged up so much that I can't help but feel that it's a lot of noise. No matter how talented the people working on these things might be, no matter how much passion each and every one of them put into each and every one of their contributions, there's just so much of it now, it's harder to parse. So this speaks to being a consumer of media in our age in general, in that we all have to find new ways and develop new filters for how to take this stuff in, because you can't take it all in.
Yeah.
You have to choose. I'm going to sample from this. I'm going to sample from this and let that stuff make its big impact on me. But where I came from before, there was less of it. Mm-hmm. And so these films did have the opportunity to be more cultural events that they'd last for months in the theaters. They'd have second releases a couple of years later, sometimes with new shots added, right?
See, what's really interesting, and to your point of the whole, you ask, well, why do people from my generation, why do they care? Why is it interesting to us? What's interesting about it is that the creativity, yes, there's a lot of creativity involved with digital special effects and everything that you see now, whether it be in Marvel films or really any film now. I feel like almost every single film has some sort of special effects in it now. Of course, that takes an immense amount of creativity and skill and all of that. But when that technology wasn't there, the films that are able to give the illusion that it's something that you can't physically do or see or feel or touch, whatever, that blows my mind, because the amount of planning and the amount of rigging up, trying to think, okay, well, I bet doing this and this and adding this matte painting in the background with, we have the camera here, we make these miniatures here or whatever. I feel like that takes so much more creativity in the sense of it's that whole thought of you have to do more with less given, right? Yeah. So it's almost
you've got the physical world.
Yeah,
it's like your limits are those of physics, gravity, and time and money. Those are consistent throughout. You always have time and money as your constant limiters, right? But to your point, there's an ingenuity. There's a cleverness of problem solving. Yeah. This is what makes me a sentimental slob about physical old school special effects, pre-digital. And all the way through my time at ILM, I was so thrilled that they still had their model shop and that they still used miniatures.
Yes.
No matter how much some people really didn't like to promote that and wanted to say, no, we're all digital. It's digital, the new world. It's all digital, everything. It's like, no, that's not something to boast about. What you boast about is the beautiful stuff on screen that you've achieved with all the tools, best of all of them, physical, miniatures,
don't limit yourself.
Sets. Don't limit yourself. Use it all. And the marriage of these things cleverly, that's where the magic to me happens. It touches back to what you said. It's like when you see the amazing, clever solutions people came up with to these visual problems and how well they were able to solve them back then. And this isn't all about just back then and this never happens now. It's just too broad brush. But we're talking about a progression through time.
Mm-hmm.
And before digital, this was what everybody had to contend with. And you make that budget a low budget, then your ingenuity has to get even deeper, right? Because you got to scrape and dig even
That's
more.
What I love,
right?
Because that
is the mother of invention.
Exactly, and that's what I like about Chris Nolan movies. He's my favorite director.
Yeah.
Is he does everything he can to make sure that everything's practical. It's very rare that he
celebrates.
I mean, for Tenet, he legitimately crashed a plane into a building, into an airport.
I know.
Like at that point, that's just like a studio saying, "Hey, here's a blank check. Write what you need. Have fun."
Yeah.
You know. But I understand not many people get that luxury, but he could easily spend a bunch of money doing special effects for all that stuff, or I'm not. He could spend a lot of money having it all digital. But he understands the value that practical, physical, real, things like that. He understands the value that has to film. And it makes it impossible for people to sit there and go, "Oh, that's fake." Wait a minute, they're running right next to it, and it's almost like it just adds a whole real layer that isn't there with digital, and I feel that gets lost with digital sometimes.
It just does. So another word that's good to bring up, another idea is mystery. And the whole idea that now because we can show everything, we are showing everything. It is all about seeing every little detail. So this is another very subjective, reasonable debate reasonable people can have about, it's different aesthetics. There's no one answer or prescriptive rule that says you should or should not be more or less explicit or hide stuff, conceal versus reveal. But that is an aspect of it, I think, that contributes to this sum total of just quantity and feeling overwhelmed, which makes us as human beings just get bored by seeing the same thing, no matter how amazing it is. We see the same thing over and over again. It's like, okay, another digital creature showing up in the latest Marvel series. Okay, is it a good one? It's not, is this monster? It's the fact that there is a monster and it's amazingly well done. It's like, what do okay, whatever.
Yeah.
I can't keep up with all the amazing visual effects that are made now. And it used to be a point of pride for me. Every visual effects movie had a certain chapter in my life. I would see it. Yeah. And I'd see it multiple times. And that was before we had streaming and before we had VHS. Yes, I do go back that far.
So do I.
To remember pre-VHS.
I don't there you go. I was
That's
not
where
around
Grindhouse
for
movie theaters came in.
You
remember Blockbuster Video?
Oh yeah. I loved Blockbuster, and I loved
that was a mainstay.
There was even a local video store. It was called CJ Video, and that was the video store that we'd always go to all the time. And it was always an experience, But I would love to. So as I told you before before the end of every show, I always do a little segment called The Goods. And it's just a few kind of rapid fire questions just to kind of pick your brain a little bit and, and kind of see where you land on these things. So shall we get to it?
All right.
All right.
I'm ready.
Number 1. What do you think is one of the best displays of visual effects and design that you have seen in a film? I know that's a very difficult question.
That's one of those
the first thing that can come to your head. The first thing that can come to your head.
It's a gotcha question because, well, I feel like there's echoes from some of the other topics we've just discussed about not being able to. I can't cover it all. I can't name every one because there are so many. So I'll just have to.
Yeah. One that blew you away. One that blew you away when you saw it. How about that? One that just really
well,
just blew you away when you
yeah,
saw it.
and I'm not going to put any other conditions on it, and therefore it makes it real easy because I'm going to go for real old school. I'm going to go for my formative sort of inspiration, and that's 2001, A Space Odyssey by Kubrick. And I'm
Perfect.
not unique. That's
Bam.
not an original, shocking thing. It's just.
But that has to say something though about.
And then I have to.
Yeah, it has to say something about the quality of it.
Yeah, absolutely. The innovations that we've talked about earlier with the stagecraft and the Mandalorian and all that, the way they're doing that, to me, is just a beautiful evolution of stuff they were doing in 2001. Talk about a shining example of everything you and I just talked about.
Yeah.
Ingenuity, science, technology, mechanics, machinery, optics, animation stands, and I mean, just complex mechanical solutions to things, real experimentation. Douglas Trumbull, effects supervisor on 2001, responsible for later on Close Encounters of the Third Kind and others. But he was the effects lead on 2001, working with Stanley Kubrick. And the amount of sheer innovation and invention that they went through to show things that had never been shown. And what a elegant and professional, just like successful, grown-up end result.
Yeah.
Trippy movie, weird, dreamlike, whatever. Some people can't get it or understand it. That's fine. But just from a visual film craft point of view, it is freaking iconic and amazing. And it just all the talk about shoulders that we're all standing on. I just feel that that's one of those.
Okay, great. What's the most rewarding film that you've worked on for yourself, you personally?
I'm going to say it was The Mummy, number one.
Okay.
The Mummy.
And how come?
Peter Pan was another one. For The Mummy, as I mentioned earlier, it was one of those, all the different varieties of circumstances that we get to play and work with and help bring to life the director's vision for the film. We're given different amounts of creative latitude, and that was one where we were given a lot. And I was fortunate enough to have my version, among many other great versions, my version of the creature, the mummy, and some of the other effects just kind of hit with the director. And you can't predict those things. There's no formula. I believe that a lot of the artists who did amazing drawings of creatures that were competing or, shown next to mine were better than mine in so many ways. I look up to them. It just happened the director liked mine and it clicked. And so that was fantastic. And that just built, that film ended up being both very stressful, great learning experience. It taught me so much. I got some of the most valuable lessons in humility, in how far to push, and then to get, okay, I was too far. Okay.
Yeah.
But now I'm going to push a little more, but I'm going to maybe try a different way. Lots of those experiences. And then just visually and creatively, there's no other way to put it, really. There's a lot of my imagination that made it on screen. And it's not just about my imagination, but as far as the art director role or the effects visual design goes, I can say that. But I absolutely have to also say, in tandem with all the contributions of everybody else, it just clicked. The whole team, the creature team, the animation team, the model shop, the miniatures, the compositing, and the film itself. One man's opinion. I just really think the whole film kind of holds up as a fun thing. The spirit of the film holds up well.
Yes.
And all the pieces kind of came together. And again, what's that formula? I don't know. People try to recreate it all the time. But so it's not magic. Like I'm holding that up as the best film. But for me, your question
most
is
rewarding.
For me, what is the most fulfilling, rewarding? I got to say both the making of and then the reception it's gotten since.
Yeah.
That's going to be the one.
All right. And then my final question for you is, how have you kept and continue to keep a positive attitude and keep yourself grounded, day to day, especially in such an up and down career or I mean, in being within such an up and down industry, I should say.
Yeah.
How do you maintain those levels of positivity and moving forward always and all of that stuff?
Rapid, huh?
That one's not
Rapid
rapid.
answer.
That one's not rapid. That you can
Okay.
take your time on that one if you'd like.
I hope I don't make you
'Cause it's
regret giving
important.
me that latitude. It's a big question. It's a really great question. It's not an easy thing to achieve what you just described, to stay grounded. There are so many ways that, first of all, there's a lot of ways to interpret and slice kind of what you just asked.
Mhm.
What does staying grounded and staying positive mean? I'm going to come at it from the angle of daily sort of self-esteem battle that we fight, sometimes literally daily, sometimes questioning. And I don't know if we artists and art types like to describe lots of generalities in terms of our own tribe of fellow artists. But the reality is quite often these generalities we use are just as true for anybody else, not in the arts, involved in whatever their own pursuit is in some way. But I'm still going to say that some of these things are more true, uniquely true for artists and creative types. They're true in a different way. And I don't know if this endless self-doubt is a universal human condition or not, but I sure know from all the artists and creatives that I've talked to, it seems to be a pretty universal thing for us.
Yeah.
And this, because we're asked what I often call the impossible bargain, the impossible ask, the impossible demand that we are asked to deliver on every day we show up. This is in the fields of design, in the fields of production art on video games, or in technology and software design and film. I'm sure it's true of theater and other related mediums. You're asked to show up and bring your passion and your creativity, which is so indelibly tied to your ego and yourself, however you define that. And yet you're participating in something so inherently collaborative that you also have to make room. You have to bring this mix of humility and self-confidence in what you're bringing. And to learn where the right boundary is and how firm or porous that boundary is between the thing you bring and the thing other people bring, that's a lifetime learning journey right there. And so how one gets to that's one version, one definition of staying grounded, is checking yourself in terms of the boundaries of your ego and what the relative importance of the thing you bring. You may or may not be in love with it on that day. You may hate it, but it's the thing you're going to show up and bring. How important is that? Where is it most important? And where and how do you let in the influence of the other collaborators? When do you decide when is it the right time to defer and say, you know what? You're the director. It is not my place in this grand machine to contradict you. If there is a opportunity and the field and the conversation feels like it's a conversation and you're asking for my input, I will be there and give it to you. But at the end of the day, this is your call, for an example, and I therefore am going to do my best to accommodate and help you with your vision. Other times it's a little more of my vision, so I have to be ready to know what to say and what to do. It's where to, improv has this great, everyone knows the, yes and as opposed to yes but. Just core practice, the core pillar of that practice is all about openness to somebody else. You don't show up to a collaboration, in that case, improv, disproportionately about you. I'm going to tell this story. I've got this great idea, and this is going to be my journey that others are going to follow on. That's not how it works. So trying to find a way to bring that mix of humility and passion, where you're really genuinely fired up about what you do and what you bring, but you're also ready for it at a moment's notice to get set aside for any host of reasons, and a new thing, be ready to just pivot. That kind of agility also takes a lot. So distilling all this down, one way to stay really grounded is to practice not getting precious. Not getting precious about yourself, about your ego, about your contribution, your self-importance. For that matter, precious passionateness about this thing, which is going to be the most important thing in my whole life forever. I have to make this count now, or that's it. You got to find a way to check that too, because it's not at the end of the day. And I don't mean to diminish the enormous amount of passion and focus it takes, where you kind of do. Also, it's contradictory. In certain moments, you also do need to, again, that's bringing the passion. You need to treat that thing as the most important. You're fully invested in the moment. But it's this delicate, impossible balancing act. That's why I think I call it impossible, the impossible demand. And yet that's exactly what we all have to figure out how to show up and do. And again, I haven't arrived. I'd love to meet someone who's arrived.
Yeah, really.
Right?
Really. Yeah. It's always, I think, an ongoing journey that will always continue to be something for you to chase. But as long as you understand that it's healthy to continue to try and chase that, even if you don't get there, then I think you're doing all right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for being here and talking with me and letting me personally nerd out. Going over all this stuff, and I'm really, really honored that you took some time out of your day to come talk with me, and I hope that you will come back one day and we can talk more. And
I'd love to. I enjoyed
and
nerding out with you too, Patrick, and I'd love to hear more about your reflections and perspective on some of the things we talked about, because like we said, they're pretty universal themes. Mm-hmm. We nerded out on the aspect of what I practice and what I do, that zone, but there's so many overlaps. I have deep respect for actors and what you do, and for real-time performance, in the moment performance, and that goes across theater, film, and all mediums. But I've always had this outsider's sort of close cousin, behind the stage, behind the scenes perspective of deep admiration and fascination for what you do. And I would love the chance to have a conversation with you about and get your perspective on it.
Well, yes, anytime. I mean, I am always willing to talk about all this stuff and have conversations. And I mean, that's why I do this. I love having conversations with people. And, so anytime you want to talk, you just hit me up and we will gladly engage in another conversation.
Awesome.
But, I won't take up any more of your time today, but thank you very much for
thank you
stopping by. And,
absolutely.
And I wish you well.
Patrick. Back at you. Same to you. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
All right, and that wraps up this episode of The Good Life. Thank you for checking it out. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I know there was a lot of information, a lot of stories in it, but it's worth every single second. And so thank you to Alex for being here, and I hope we can do it again. And to all of you, we will see you next week.